when it comes to the operating systems of our life, a lack-nothing operating system, I believe, recognizes that being with Jesus is greater than doing for Jesus. Hey, my name's Jason, and I am super grateful to be here tonight. So grateful. And I'm super grateful that my wife is with me. And so, babe, would you do me a favor? I know you hate doing this, but would you just stand up and let everyone see how cute you are? Even with the mask on, you can do that. Yeah, do that for us. Yeah. Yep. So I actually refer to Kristen as Cute Kristen, or KK, as I like to refer to her, because I still think she's the cutest thing I have ever seen, and I'm super pumped about it. And I know that a lot of people that are like younger than me, much younger than me, you feel like that's a little creepy. I know that. I get that. But I was actually thinking this week about this idea of Psalm 23, and I was thinking of this title, A Lack-Nothing Lifestyle. And I was thinking of the idea of like the opposite of that would be like a lackluster lifestyle. That would be a really lame message to come out on a Sunday night for. Like, hey, come and find out about the lackluster lifestyle that you can live. I actually feel like I have a lack-nothing lifestyle going on for me right now, primarily because of this weekend. This weekend has been like an over-the-top weekend for me. Started yesterday. My wife and I, will talk a little bit more about this later, but we do this thing called Sabbath every week where we just spend a whole day just kind of replenishing and rejoicing in God's goodness to us, and it's super fun. We love it. And then I wrapped up my Sabbath by watching the most incredible rugby league match where my Manly Sea Eagles just looked amazing. When you have Tommy Turbo, you can truly say we lack nothing. Like, we are a lack-nothing team, okay? And then today, my kids hooked me up. Check these out. My kids hooked me up with a new pair of shoes. These are not lackluster. These are lack-nothing kind of shoes. And these actually, I was saying to Kristen on the way over here, these are like totally 1980s throwbacks. I remember making fun of American tourists around Circular Quay that wore these in the 1980s with khaki shorts and T-shirts tucked in with like brown leather belts. I was like, yep, pick the American. You can see them everywhere. They wear bright, white, shiny Reeboks. And now I'm wearing them. I'm the American tourist that's now wearing them. We are talking about a lack-nothing lifestyle tonight. And it's way better than shiny new Reeboks, way better than Tommy Turbo, although he is pretty amazing. And I would love for you to think about this by, first of all, taking out your mobile phone. Would you do me a favor? Take out your phone. And I would love for you to text this number up on the screen. There's a number up on the screen. And I would love for you to predict who is going to win the 2021 NRL Premiership. And if you want a special prize better than a yellow AFL football, you may want to put the Manly Sea Eagles, maybe. Who knows? Tell us who you think is going to win the NRL Premiership. Just text that in. And then I've got a second question for you. My second question is this. Tell me what type of mobile operating system you use on your phone. So tell me what type. So you've texted in Manly, obviously, because they're probably going to win. Unless you're a Broncos fan and you still have this weird idea that they were even in the finals, but that's okay. Android or iOS, or maybe you're like a real like out there geek, like you've got like a Linux or some sort of mobile device that people haven't even heard of. Maybe that's your mobile device and that's the operating system. All right, and then the second thing I'd love for you to do is text not just your operating system of your mobile device, but which one do you prefer when it comes to your actual laptop or computing system, okay? Most people either have a Windows or a Mac. Here's what I've actually discovered when it comes to operating systems, both on phones and on actual computer systems. I used to think that I was kind of cool because I was all into Apple. But what I've really figured out is that I'm just lazy and I just want everything to work without having to do anything. And all the people that really get IT, they're all into Windows and Androids, and they do some work to make things do things that I don't even have a clue what's going on. But I'm just basically a lazy computer user because of the type of operating system that I use. So you've told us the grand final winner. You've told us what operating system you use on your phone, and then hopefully you've told us what operating system you use on your computer. I want you to take a look at the screen really quickly. Up on the screen is what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is kind of like what psychologists would call like the human operating system. So just like a computer and a phone needs a type of software in order to run all the applications. So the hardware is your actual device. That's the actual phone or the computer that you use. The operating system is this piece of software that runs in the background, constantly running in the background, that runs all the applications that we use. So when you send a message to someone, maybe use iMessage or use SMS, whatever it is that you use, that's an application that's running off of an operating system on your device, the hardware, okay? That's how it kind of works, and we interact with the applications as users. In life, we have an operating system as well. Just like a phone does, just like a computer does, there's a human operating system, and Maslow would say that our hierarchy of needs, or our needs, are kind of the operating system of our life. And here's what happens when you have that kind of operating system going on inside of you. You make some decisions as to how you're going to apply that operating system to life. And most of culture, in fact, I get the newspaper every Saturday morning. I'm really showing my old man status. Like, I get a physical newspaper delivered to my home on a Saturday morning so that I don't spend as much time on technology over the weekend, and I read an actual newspaper. I was stunned as I was reading it this weekend, the Weekend Australian, how externally focused the operating system is in our culture today. Here's how externally focused it is. It is all focused on these three things: what we do, what we have, and what people think or say about us. In fact, almost every article I read this weekend was all focused on these external things. You might say, you know what, Jason? I know that maybe culture is like that, but my life, my operating system is not completely externally focused. And maybe you just showed up here tonight and you've never been to church before and you're like, hey, what's wrong with this kind of externally focused operating system? We'll get to that in just a moment. But before we get to that, I want you to do kind of like your own self-evaluation. Don't text in your answer, okay, because that could be really embarrassing. But I want you to answer this question up on the screen. What is it that you think about when you first wake up in the morning? Don't text in your answer. It could be very embarrassing. But what do you think about when you first wake up in the morning? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? For most people, psychologists actually say more than 60% of people, the first thing that comes into their mind when they wake up in the morning is what they have to do that day. First thing that comes to mind, what have I got to get done today? So our operating system as human beings tends to gravitate towards these things of what am I going to do? Or maybe it's what I'm going to have, like maybe what I'm going to have for breakfast, or what I'm going to have over lunch today, or what I'm going to have in a meeting, or what do I have to take with me to something that I'm doing that day? Or maybe, just maybe, you reach for a device to find out what people think or say about you in the last 24 hours. Like, what did they think of that post? I made that really cool reel yesterday, put the music to it, had the fading thing in. So sweet. Wonder how many people liked, or even better, wonder how many people shared my reel. So many of us, when we wake up in the morning, our operating system, this internal operating system, is all about what do we do? What do we have? What do people think of us? You know how we apply that then? You know the application that works off the operating system? You know what it ends up doing? We end up doing more so that we can have more, so that people will think more of us and maybe even say more about us, is what we end up doing to apply this operating system that so many of us live by. Now, if you are a person that doesn't typically go to church, and you're still checking out the whole kind of church, Christianity, Jesus thing, I want you to lean in for just a second, because I want to tell you a little secret about church people. All the church people in the room, you can tune out because you already know this, okay? So you don't even have to pay attention. But if you're not typically in church, you don't typically follow the Bible or follow Jesus, maybe you're still checking it out. Maybe you're just here tonight because they told us there were really cute girls here at this church. Whatever it is, whatever reason it is that you're here, here's what I want to tell you, a secret about church people. We take this whole idea that's up on the screen and we religiously complicate it. This is what church people do. We do more for God because we think that if we do that, we'll have a better relationship with God. And then we think that God might actually think better of us, maybe say better things about us. And I'm here to tell you, I'm the worst offender at this. I've been doing it for a long period of time. I grew up in the church. Got all sorts of prizes and awards for all the things that you would do for God. Even showing up to church, you just got a prize for showing up, like a yellow football sometimes. You just get prizes and rewards for what you did for God. And we would never say it. In fact, I never stood up on a platform and said, well, if you do more for God, then God is going to think more of you. Or you'll have a better relationship. I would never say that. I would always say, Jesus has already done everything for you. You don't have anything to do. But the operating system of my life and the way that it applied itself looked a lot like this religious complication. Doing more for God so that I might have a better relationship with Him, so He might think more of me and maybe even say better things about me. This worked for me for a very long period of time. I would say for almost 40 years of my Christian life, this worked well for me. It led me to do a number of things for God that most people from the outside, externally, would look at and say, wow, that guy does a lot for God. He must have a great relationship with God, and God must think a lot of him. Leading organizations, worldwide camping and conferencing organizations, then led me to a church in Austin, Texas, where I was speaking there, which led me to another church in Colorado Springs, where within the first 2 years of being at the church in Colorado Springs, doing for God, the church was skyrocketing in attendance. More than doubled in attendance. You know those connect groups that Dan talked about, and you can go to that website, which, by the way, I totally recommend checking out all of those connect groups. I think they're fantastic. At that church, we more than tripled the amount of people in connect groups in the first 18 months of going there. Along with that, we started a little movement in the city of Colorado Springs called COS I Love You, which is a play on words. COS is the abbreviation for Colorado Springs. 'Cause I Love You was this movement that we started as a church to love the city with no strings attached. Within 2 years, more than 100 churches in Colorado Springs had joined the movement. It's still going today, and it's the most amazing thing that's changing the perception of people in that city as it relates to the church. All the while, externally, things going great. Internally, I'm crumbling on the inside. In fact, I'll never forget being so frustrated with certain things that were happening in my life that I was walking around my neighborhood one night with Kristen, and my neighbors probably thought, man, that guy has like this bipolar relationship with God. Some nights he's swearing at God, other nights he's listening and quietly talking to God. Like, he just really has an interesting relationship, very complicated relationship with God. That particular night was kind of one of those swearing nights. And I actually took off my glasses. I was so angry, and I snapped them in half and threw them on the ground. I was so mad at God. And I finally realized I couldn't keep living the Christian life this way. Something had to change. So I reached out to a friend of mine who is a pastor up an hour north of us in a city called Denver, and he put me in touch with this guy who's become the most incredible friend. In fact, I refer to Lance as my soul coach. He's an incredible guy. And Lance introduced me to this idea that I think Psalm 23 talks a lot about. Lance introduced me to this idea of soul care. Lance defines soul care like this. He says it's tending to the garden of your inner life. My operating system had been completely focused on tending to the garden of my external life for so long. And so many followers of Jesus, we fall into this trap. And Lance said, no, Jason, it's actually about tending to the garden of your internal life. What I learned through the last probably 5 or 6 years or so now is that when it comes to the health of your internal life, it will eventually be revealed in your external life. The temperature of your internal health will always be revealed in your external life. And so tonight, I want us to take a look at Psalm 23 because I think that Psalm 23 actually gives us an operating system for life that is far better than what most of our culture today is handing to us. Culture today is all about the external. What do you do? What do you have? What do people think? Or what do they say about you? Psalm 23 offers us an alternative to that operating system. It's almost like the entire world is running off of the Mac because it's just concerned about what everybody thinks about it, what it looks like. And here comes Psalm 23 and says, no, there's a different operating system. And David wants to share it with us. Now, here's the challenge with Psalm 23. This is a major challenge. Even if you're not a church person, even if you don't normally come here on a Sunday night, the challenge is this. Because it's so familiar, it oftentimes loses its power. It loses its power because of the familiarity of this psalm. It's the most quoted psalm in all of the world, the most popular poem that's ever been written. So I want to read it to you slowly tonight. And I want to just allow the time it takes to read it to let it sink in, the truth of this operating system. Listen to the words that David writes. You may even want to close your eyes and just listen so that you focus on the words. Here's what David writes. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Notice just in those first 3 verses, how much is the sheep doing? Notice how much the sheep is doing. The Lord is the shepherd. He makes me lie down. He leads me. He refreshes. He guides me for his name's sake. All the striving, all the doing, all the external work. David's saying, no, there's a different operating system that the shepherd wants to invite you into. Listen to the next part of the psalm. It says in verse 4, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod, your staff, they comfort me. Notice again, it's not the sheep's staff or the sheep's rod. As I read through that, all I have in my mind, I'm just going to be completely transparent, is Coolio, Dangerous Minds, Gangster's Paradise. I don't know if you guys resonate with any of that, though I walk through the valley of the shadow. Yeah. But notice here in the operating system again of Psalm 23, what the sheep isn't doing and what the shepherd is doing. And then listen to this last part of the psalm. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Notice that in this psalm operating system of Psalm 23, 2 things stand out to me. The first thing is this. Notice that the role of the shepherd is to do all of the heavy lifting in the psalm. It doesn't mean the sheep doesn't do anything, but notice that the shepherd is the one that's doing all of the heavy lifting. And then the second thing I'd love for you to notice in Psalm 23 operating system is this, that the role of the sheep is to stay close to the shepherd. That's really the whole purpose. That's the whole priority of the operating system for the sheep, is just to stay close to the shepherd. The shepherd does all the heavy lifting. The sheep simply stay close to the shepherd. So here's a question for you. How does the Psalm 23 operating system compare to your life operating system today? When you think about the operating system of your life right now, and you compare it to the Psalm 23 operating system, how does that compare currently for you? Jesus talked a lot about operating systems, although he didn't use those words. Jesus actually modeled for us a lifestyle, an operating system that he lived out. And while he was traveling with his disciples, one of his first followers, a guy named Luke, who, if you're not a follower of Jesus and you're not a church person, I would highly recommend that you check out the biography that this guy named Luke wrote about Jesus. Here's the reason why I highly recommend you checking it out. Luke lived in the first century, and at the beginning of his biography about Jesus, these were his words. He said, "Many people have had a shot at writing about Jesus' life. I am taking the time to write a detailed account of Jesus' life so that you can know that these things are true." Luke writes a story for us about Jesus and his followers. As they're traveling from town to town, they come into this village. And we pick up the story in Luke chapter 10, verse 38. It says this: "As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened up her home to him." Now, when you see the words "opened up her home," this is not like, "Hey, come on in for a cup of tea," or "come on in for a meal." This is literally like, "Hey, come on in with your whole crew and stay with us." Like when Jesus traveled, he didn't rent out like entire levels of the hotel for his crusade, for him and his crew. They just stayed with people wherever they went. And this lady named Martha welcomed him and the whole crew into her home. Martha has a sister. Luke gives us the details of the sister. He says, she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Now, don't miss this. This is really crucial. In the first century, a rabbi, who Jesus was, comes into somebody's home. Everybody wants to sit close to the rabbi. But most often, people want to sit on the right or the left-hand side of the rabbi, because when you sit next to the rabbi, you actually are seen as somebody that's incredibly important. Notice where Mary is sitting. Mary wants to sit at the feet of Jesus. Mary wants to not just have a place that's close to Jesus so that she can be seen to be important. I love this about Mary. She wants to sit at his feet so that she can listen to Jesus. I love the word disciple, and my favorite kind of definition of the word disciple is this word apprentice. I think that's exactly what Mary was wanting to do that night. She was wanting to sit and listen, not just to learn the lessons that Jesus was going to teach, but to learn the lifestyle that Jesus lived as well. She positioned herself at the feet of Jesus. And check out what Martha's doing. Talk about different operating systems. Mary and Martha have different operating systems. Listen to this. But Martha, while Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus, was distracted by all the preparations that had to be done. Does that sound familiar? It sounds familiar to me. Jason, while Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, Jason was completely distracted by all the things that he needed to get done for Jesus. That's my typical operating system. Then goes on and says, she came to him, speaking of Martha, and asked the Lord, "Don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself?" Tell you what, Martha's like super gutsy. I feel like Martha might have been like an Enneagram 8, possibly a challenger, maybe, not certain of that, but possibly. Like, what up, Jesus? Don't you care that I'm doing all the work? And then Martha doubles down. Not only does she question Jesus, she then tells Jesus what to do. Tell her to come and help me, she says. Listen to Jesus' response. Man, this is so much like the Good Shepherd. This is so much like the kind and gracious shepherd. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things. Lots of things on the to-do list. Lots of things on the to-have list, hoping that everybody will notice and speak well of you. But few things are needed. And then Jesus doubles down and says, or indeed, only one. Jesus actually triples down. He doesn't just double down. He one-ups Martha. And he goes on to say this. He says, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. When it comes to the operating systems of our life, a lack-nothing operating system, I believe, recognizes that being with Jesus is greater than doing for Jesus. That's a lack-nothing operating system. Recognizing that being with Jesus is actually greater than doing for Jesus. This simple truth has been incredibly transformative for me in my life. This is what Jesus was talking about when he said this, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. And apart from me, you can do nothing. Absolutely nothing. So here's what I want to do to wrap up our time together as we're thinking about operating systems. I want you to think about an operating system kind of in a 1500-year-old concept. There was a guy named Benedict, and Benedict came up with this idea called a rule of life. It was simply an operating system so that instead of doing all the heavy lifting, we actually let the shepherd do all the heavy lifting, and we just stay close to the shepherd. That was kind of Benedict's whole idea, was being with Jesus is greater than doing for Jesus. It doesn't mean that you end up doing nothing for Jesus. In fact, everything in you of the being with Jesus will flow into what you're doing for Jesus. And I want to share with you just simply kind of an internal operating system or a rule of life that's been incredibly helpful for me over the last 5 or 6 years. Here's what the operating system looks like. For me, it starts as I get up out of bed with what I call the surrender startup. And the surrender startup is really simple. It's kind of like starting up your computer. When you start up your computer, it boots all of the applications and things. My startup system simply says this: I can't, but you can. Just 4 words each day. God, I can't, but I know you can. And you want to do it in me, and you want to do it through me, because you said that you would never, ever leave me. But I'm telling you, God, I can't, but you can. And then I spend some time in silence and solitude. This is where it gets really weird. I'm just going to tell you up front, it's weird. I make a cup of tea, and then I make my way into the living room, and I actually visually look across my living room at one of my other seats in the living room, and I pretend, or I think to myself, Jesus is there with me. I don't pretend, because he is. And it's almost like every day when I sit down with my cup of tea, I haven't gotten super weird and made him a cup of tea yet. I'm not getting to that point. Maybe one day. He may drink coffee. You're right, Dan. Probably does. But I think to myself, he's been up all night just waiting for me to show up. He's like the greatest friend where no time has ever passed. It's so special. And I just sit and just listen to what he wants to say to me that day. What is it that you want to do? And then throughout the day, I take a couple of pauses. They're called a daily office. You can look it up online if you want to, but daily office is just simply some time in silence and then listening to God, and then some time in prayer and a short little devotional. I pause twice throughout the day because I get so busy. I'm such a Martha. I'm so distracted by all the things, all the preparations, all the things that need to get done, that I literally have to pause throughout the day to recenter and get direction from the shepherd once again. And then each week, as I mentioned before, my wife and I, we take a Sabbath, a 24-hour period. We happen to do it on a Friday through to a Saturday night, where we just spend time only doing activities that replenish our soul and cause us to rejoice in God's goodness. If it's distracting or draining, we don't do it. If it's replenishing and causes us to rejoice, then we do it on Sabbath. And then the last thing that's been transformative for me lately in my kind of internal operating system is this idea of reading Scripture in a different way. I was raised kind of reading Scripture for information, not transformation. Like, hey, I had to get through the whole Bible in a year, or I had to read a proverb a day, the whole chapter. But I was really reading it for information, not transformation. And this final piece, this idea of Lectio Divina, has been incredibly transformational for me. So here's what I want to encourage you to do. I'd love for you to pick one of the things up there on the list that kind of stands out to you. And I would love for you to just simply text whatever number it is to that number that I had you text in before. If you're interested in learning more about what does that surrender startup look like, or Jason, what does Sabbath look like, or what is the daily, we can't get into all the detail of it here tonight, but what does it even look like to develop kind of a rule of life or an internal operating system that looks like a Psalm 23 kind of lifestyle? What does that look like? I want to help you out with some resources that I'd love to text you that might be helpful in taking a first step towards that. Here's what I'd love to do to wrap up. I want to read for you a quote from one of my favorite authors, a guy named Henry Nouwen. He says this about spiritual identity. He says, spiritual identity means we are not what we do, we are not what we have, or what people say about us. We are the beloved daughters and sons of God.